Welcome to my session on the BizApps Bootcamp 2022, organized by the Dynamics 365 and Power Community User Group. Thanks for inviting me to speak. Today, I will talk about integrating with Dynamics 365 finance and operations. And my idea for this session, which was a suggestion from Rakesh, so thanks for the suggestion, because sometimes it's hard to think about things to do a session, is like how a external developer or external consultant, someone that doesn't fully know or knows nothing at all about finance and operations, should integrate with the ERP. So we will see a bit of integration 101, so the basics, synchronous versus asynchronous patterns, then the patterns, and the API limits, which is something that has been, it has gone generally available in the last version, I think. And finally, some tools that we have to work with integrations and some ideas. So my name is Adrià Ariste. I'm based near Madrid in Spain. And well, I'm a Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations technical architect, developer. I'm a technical person. I like working in the technical aspects of an implementation. I'm currently working as a Dynamics 365 F&O technical application manager at Hellman Worldwide Logistics, which is a logistics company, as the name, as you can see in the name. And well, you can read my blog at ariste.info. And well, I've been, mostly thanks to the blog, a Microsoft MVP for the last 2 years, since October 2020. And let me start with something comparing with the old AX days, which looks like it's something many people like to do, because I've seen that also Andrea has done some comparison with AX4 and 2009. I like to remember also the old days of AX. So when we thought of integrations in Dynamics AX, what first comes to my mind are 3 things, and those were the most usual things. This doesn't mean that it was the only way of integrating with the ERP, but were some of the most common ways of doing it. The first way of doing it was file-based integrations, because most of in AX 2009, all of the projects were hosted on-prem. You had access to a file system, so you could set up a file share where, for example, CSV files were uploaded from an external system, then processed into the ERP. That was quite common. Then there was the application integration framework, especially in 2012, which were like web services. They were web services. You had to set up the framework, and you could access through HTTP calls to some custom web services. I forgot to add here also the business connector, which was something that you could use to create integrations with other systems using .NET. I didn't like it a lot. And finally, we had another way of integrating, which was writing to the AXDB or the same SQL Server database or server from external sources. So this is something that scared me a bit, but it was quite usual, have separate tables in the same schema in the AXDB database. And, so an external system would just connect to the AXDB and write into those tables. I've even seen some systems getting the next rec ID to create records directly into customers or vendors. And well, it was fun, and it's something I'm happy that we cannot do anymore. And of course, AX is gone. We need to forget about this. We need to forget about having on-prem systems, and we need to start thinking on Dynamics 365 style. With the change from AX to 365, the ERP went to the cloud. And well, so a file system on our servers is something that it's not possible anymore. And we need to use other tools. Which other tools? So it's mostly REST calls. REST, which means HTTP calls. It's a cloud ERP, and the way we have to get data in and out of the ERP is using these REST calls. So first of all, if you need to integrate with Dynamics 365, this, regardless of if it's the ERP or the CRM, you will need to authenticate. And in this case, we need to use this flow, authentication flow, which is, I think it's the same for all Microsoft or business applications products. And you will need an Azure Active Directory application registration, both the application ID and the secret. And with this, you will be able to authenticate using a service to service. So this means without a user password. As you can see, the flow from your application, you make a call to Azure ID, which returns a token, and then with that token, you can authenticate into the ERP. Something just so you know. And well, I want to talk before starting with synchronous or asynchronous about data entities. Data entities are a normalized view or denormalized view of tables. So, for example, this is the customer entities, and it shows that on the data sources we have a customer table, and then joined to the customer table there are several other tables or entities. Data entities are used to create something that is human understandable, and well, they are our door to the ERP, because data entities, especially or when they are public and using the public collection name property, we can access all data, public data entities, only the public ones. If the entity is not public, it's not possible to access it using all data, but it's possible to use it with a data management framework if it has the data management enabled property set to yes. We will see that later. So when starting a project where you need to integrate with the ERP, you need first, of course, analyze the requirements and decide if you need a synchronous or an asynchronous integration pattern. And you need to ask yourself two things. The first one is, do I really need real-time access to data? Because sometimes we think we need to do things in real time or near real time, but these external systems do not need to have data at the moment, so they can just retrieve it and consume it later. Of course, depending on the type of integration you are doing, but this is one of the questions you need to ask yourself. And the other question, it's the volume. Which volume of data will I be integrating? So for large volume integrations, synchronous is not an option. So you will choose an asynchronous pattern, because if you choose a synchronous pattern with large volume, you are just waiting until all the data you're retrieving has come to your end. Plus, you're blocking your current system. And the performance from OData, sometimes when you go and try to retrieve a lot of records, will start degrading system performance. Fortunately, there are ways of preventing this, as we will see later. And if you have a low volume requirement, then you can do asynchronous. You can use a synchronous pattern. For example, if you need to retrieve a customer credit limit, single customer credit limit, just because you are checking from an external application if you can invoice to that customer, you can retrieve a single record using the customer's entity, and that's fine. So regarding patterns, I will start with the synchronous patterns and OData. As I said, when I was talking about data entities, the OData or synchronous pattern, or OData, which is an open data protocol, it's a protocol, depends on public data entities. Only the entities that are set as public can be accessed using OData. And as I was saying, it's used for, or should be used for, low volume integrations. Then we have custom web services. Custom web services depend on X++ code. So if you're not working with Dynamics 365, if you're not an X++ developer, and you're just integrating with the ERP, you need to ask someone to create this custom web service. Custom web services perform much more better than OData, but they are still synchronous. So you need to keep in mind that depending on what you're trying to retrieve or what operations are being triggered in the ERP, because these services are using X++ code, so you can do all kind of calls in your code, like creating data in tables, a lot of records. So depending on the code, it also can block the system that consumes the service. So again, you need to plan, if you are using a custom web service, which kind of data you're retrieving and which kind of processes are being triggered in the ERP. Next, I'm going to the synchronous pattern, and I've left a synchronous pattern for the as the last of the patterns I want to review. So I will go back later to the synchronous ones. And the first of the asynchronous patterns would be using the data management framework REST API. This API depends on data entities that are enabled for data management. It can be used for high volume integrations because it's backed by the batch, and it also uses REST calls. So as you can see, even it was the same case with the custom web service and OData. We are always talking about REST services or HTTP calls. And additionally, for the DMF REST API, we will be uploading the files to Dynamics 365 F&O blob storage. There's a 3, that's not the next version, it's just a typo. And as I was saying, it uses a REST API where, for example, if you want to import a package into the ERP, you will be doing 3 calls. One to get the Azure URL of the blob storage, another call to upload a file into that blob storage, and a final call that will trigger the job on the data management workspace. And especially for high volume integrations, this is very helpful because from a middleware, for example, you can create a package, a zip file with as many data entities as you need, upload it to this blob storage, trigger it in the ERP, and data will be processed using the bytes. And for example, you can get the status of the running job using the execution ID with the get execution summary status operation. So you can still check, for example, if you know that the operation will take a lot of time, you can space the checking of the status like 5-10 minutes if you need to know that it has ended. If you don't, you just trigger the import and you are done. Then another asynchronous pattern we have is using the recurring integrations scheduler, which is a tool that can be found on GitHub. It's created by Microsoft, and it's meant to be run on a separate server. For example, it can be an Azure server or an on-prem server, or even something I wouldn't recommend, but your laptop. Okay, and to me, this is the thing that would be like most similar to file-based integrations, because you have this piece of software installed on a computer, on a server, wherever. Maybe in that server, you can have a file share where files are uploaded and a recurring integrations scheduler will process them. Again, this depends on data entities that have the data management enabled. So in the end, it's very similar to what the data management framework REST API does, because it's in the background, this software is calling the REST API. It's also used for high volume integrations. And as I said, it uses the DMF REST API. So this is one of the screens of the scheduler. So it's not very nice, but it works really fine. And you can configure it to run on different instances and with different credentials. So at least to me, the best would be to use always the service-to-service connection, which means that we will be using an application ID from Azure ID and a secret, so we don't need to log in using users. And the options this tool has, it allows to upload files, download files, and trigger the executions, both for importing jobs and exporting jobs. So if you configure it and have a real need to have a file-based integration, then you can upload the files to the ERP or download them, and then on the server, process them however you need on this external system. As I said, to me, it's the thing that reminds me the most of a file-based integration. It's still using a software program, but it's good. And for example, this is one of the export jobs screens. You can see you have a download folder, which is something we don't see anymore in the ERP. And well, you can configure legal entities, the name of the data project, and this will run using a service, or I think it's there is a cron expression, and I think that this was run using one of the services in Windows. And as I said, I wanted to leave one of the patterns, synchronous patterns, for the end, because it's synchronous, but it's also, or it can also be asynchronous, which is the Power Platform integration, especially the dual write one, and also virtual entities, which are always synchronous, but a dual write integration can be also asynchronous. That I will explain now. So this depends on public data entities and data management framework. And for example, for Power Automate and the virtual entities, this pattern is synchronous. And for dual write, it's synchronous and asynchronous. So why it's synchronous and asynchronous? I don't know if you know dual write, but dual write allows us to synchronize data between the ERP and Dataverse and a Dataverse environment. And that is done in near real time. But there is an option which is called initial sync, which would be something considered maybe high volume, where, for example, when you configure a table mapping, for example, for customers, you can choose which is the master source of information, the ERP or the CRM, and you trigger the initial sync process, and it will copy all the data from the CRM to the ERP or the ERP to the CRM, depending on which system you chose as a master. And this is asynchronous because it's using the data management framework. So when you trigger initial sync, you can go to the data management workspace and we'll see a job there. And well, it's low volume for Power Automate or virtual entities because virtual entities in the end, virtual entities are a representation of Dynamics 365 finance operations data inside Dataverse. It's not that the data is copied into Dataverse. It's just that you can access from Dataverse data from the ERP, and that is using the OData public data entities. I wanted to leave this for the end because if I added the virtual entities or the Power Platform integration as a synchronous pattern, I would be lying. And if I left it as an asynchronous pattern, I also would be lying. And well, as Rocky said at the beginning, I will also talk a bit about API limits because we are getting closer to Dataverse and we are getting functionalities that were not originally in the ERP. So if you've been working with F&O for a long time or since the beginning, we could say that in the beginning, what we got was an AJAX 2012 server stack with its database, its AOS, like maybe 4 virtual machines running, and they got it into Azure, and we got a new user interface. But in the background, especially if you remember sandbox environments, you could even log into the sandbox environment, open the SQL Server using SQL Server Management Studio. So it was a regular virtual machine like we were used to. So that's why I say that they just got AX 2012 R3 and put it into the cloud with a new UI. So in the last years, we are moving into a real software as a service product. And this means that we will be getting some changes, and API limits is one. We need to keep an eye on Dataverse and how they have API limits and also entitlement limits, which means that maybe they can do, I don't remember, I never remember the exact numbers, but maybe they can do like 100,000 calls to the API per day. If they go over that, they need to pay, I think they need to pay an additional license for those calls. So entitlement limits are not in the ERP. I've never seen them on the roadmap, but seeing that convergence scenario and that we are looking more and more as Dataverse, we need to maybe start thinking that could be possible someday. So for the API, one of the features we got 1 year, 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. So the last 2 years for me are very confused, and I have like an issue with time for the last 2 years. I think that this is happening to many people. So we got this priority throttling new feature. Before this feature, if you start doing calls to the ERP, for example, OData calls, you could just kill the performance of the production environment. So you wouldn't get a response, and the users that were using interactive sessions, like creating journals or whatever, they would also see a degradation in performance while they're working. This is because there was no throttling done on API calls. API calls means OData and custom web services. So Microsoft released this new feature. This new feature allows us to set which processes, which applications, which users have priority over which other applications or users. So if you set, as in the image you can see here, for example, there is a rule for priority that says that the application, the Azure Active Directory application with this client ID has a high priority. This means that if there is a lack of resources in the system, this application will have preference over other users, persons working in the ERP or other integrations. And if too many requests are done, the ERP will emit an HTTP code 429, which means that the request has been throttled. When this happens, the response of the ERP, the HTTP response, includes a retry after header with a time, which is the time you should wait until you retry the call. When a request is throttled, you can see it in LCS. You go into the environment monitoring, even though we have less and less monitoring each time I go inside LCS. And you can see all the requests that have been throttled. And well, the setup, which is the image on the right, is in the system administration of finance operations. So for example, one scenario would be that on the beginning of the month, there is a user that is uploading journals using the Excel add-in. And because the Excel add-in is using OData, that can be throttled. If you know the single user that's uploading those journals, you just should create a new entry in the priority mapping form for that user ID and set the priority high. And one final thing regarding this, if you are using a single client ID or application ID for all your processes or integrations in the ERP, that could be an issue because then you don't have a way to segment between applications. So if you have two different external systems accessing the ERP and one should have more priority over the other, you need to use two client IDs, two separate client IDs. So you can set a higher priority for that application here. Otherwise, then I think you are losing some of the functionality of this feature. And then in the last months, we've got the service protection API limits. The throttling feature is to prevent too many requests. The service protection API limits, we will see it now, is to prevent degradation of the performance by a group of parameters. So this was available in the 2028 release. It's on by default in the 29 release, which I think it's the last one that should be, well, no, I think that we are already on the 10.030. That's the one that Microsoft is applying right now as automatic updates. And it will be mandatory, not just enabled, but mandatory by default. You won't be able to disable it in the April 2023 release. So these limits, what they do is that in a 300 seconds window, which is 5 minutes, there will be user-based limits based on these three factors: number of requests sent per user, the combined time of execution for all the requests, and the concurrent number of requests for a single user. And as I was saying with the throttling feature, a user is also an application ID. So it's a good idea to have different application IDs for different processes. Because if you are using only one, it's just not that you cannot segment the throttling, but that single application will be evaluated in 300-second windows for all your processes. So start using different application IDs for different integrations. Otherwise, I think this will penalize us a little bit. It will be, we need to think when designing an integration and how we are setting it up. And hopefully, at least at the moment, there are some services that are excluded from these API limits, which are the document routing agent, the mobile app for warehouse, retail server API, Office integration, which is the Excel add-in, data import-export framework, the data integrator, dual write, virtual entities, which, well, it's virtual tables now. Virtual entities are virtual tables, but I still call it virtual entities, and the finance and operations apps connector for the Power Apps. So right now, these are excluded, but we don't know if in the future some of them could go into the API limits service protection feature, which probably will. And well, as I said, these are the limits. So a single user can do 6,000 requests within the 5 minutes window. And the request of this user can be running during 20 minutes as maximum. And this user can do 52 concurrent requests in this 5 minute window. If you exceed any of these, you will get an error message on the request, on the response, and well, the system lets you know that something has gone wrong and you have exceeded the protection API limits. And well, finally, I wanted to talk about some tools and resources, especially if you don't know anything about the ERP. There is this GitHub repo from Microsoft, which is still branded as Dynamics AX, but it has sample projects for, I think it was Java, C#, PHP, so several languages, where it shows you how you authenticate using the how you retrieve the token you need to use later, and how you can consume the services and OData for these different languages. Then there is a tool which is called Postman, which I'm sure that everyone knows about. It's an API design tool, and well, it's very useful when you are working in a team and you have different APIs, so you can have a collection of calls, and you can reuse that. You can share it if you don't use Postman or similar products, because Postman it's not the only one, but I think it's the most known, and I really like it. Give it a try, because it helps a lot, just allowing the reuse of getting the token request. That helps a lot. And well, the final tool, it's not just a tool, it's Azure. And this is also something that is very important. And there was a question before the session started about how to be better at digital transformation, and Rakesh said that we need to stop thinking like we only work with dynamics, right? So I totally agree with that. And it's something I've said several times. X++ developers are not anymore X++ developers only. We have Azure, we have the Power Platform. So tools for integrations, Azure API management, which is great. You can use service bus and queues. For example, if you have a high volume integration scenario, you can just queue the request or the data in a queue, in a service bus, and then consume that using, for example, a Power Automate. So you don't need to get all the requests to the ERP directly. You can just put the requests in a queue and consume them slowly. You can use Azure functions to connect to the ERP, to extract data from the ERP. Azure functions are great, and well, there are a lot of tools in Azure that I think that, well, I haven't explored all of them because it's impossible, but there are a lot of things in Azure that I think that can help us solve issues just by not using the ERP, but solve ERP issues. And it's something that we need to start using. We need to learn about Azure. We need to learn about the Power Platform. We need to, looks like I'm trying to sell licenses, right? But it's the truth. We have a cloud ERP in Azure. We need to take advantage of it being in Azure and start using Azure to solve some issues that sometimes appear. And well, I think that's all. I don't know if there is any question, but well, oh, I see one in the chat.
Yes, Adria, we have a question. So the question is from Kamesh, and it's specific to his situation wherein he has a kind of a scenario wherein he needs to export some FNO tables to external DB via action button, action item or something. And it takes approximately 3 or 4 or I would understand minutes and to export that data into this other external database. So is there any better way which he can kind of use for this?
So if it takes long to export and it's due to a high volume of data, I think that you're stuck with long times. So what you can do is, for example, not rely on a button. And if this is a synchronous pattern, just start using an asynchronous pattern, for example, and maybe export data packets and process these data packets later using another tool to get the data into the database. Especially if the process is being synchronous. If it's synchronous and it takes so long, you should think about changing it to an asynchronous pattern, because it's not so asynchronous process should take like seconds. And if it takes so much time, you can't have the user waiting until the wheel stops spinning. So I would suggest that.
Okay.
So
I hope Kamish's questions is answered right now. There is a follow-up question, Adria. Is it possible to create an export job in DMF if time permits?
So the issue is I don't have an environment available here because I'm on my personal PC, and sorry, I don't have access to my demo environments of the work.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe all the folks out there, we can even directly connect with Adria on the information that he has shared right now on screen, on his LinkedIn, via his LinkedIn or maybe Twitter account, so that he might reply you back. I hope that's fine, Adria, from your side.
Yes, of course.
All right. Quick shout out. Any further questions on this topic? I know this is a very huge topic and it takes some time to even digest with the contents of the integrations. All right. I hope that's it. So thank you, Adria, for a wonderful session on integration with Dynamics 365 and FNO. I must say this is the most hot topic for implementation projects in the market currently. And I'm sure our attendees must have increased our integration knowledge bank as well from this session. Once again, thank you for your time and attending this Microsoft BizApps bootcamp. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you for
Adria.
inviting me. Thanks.
Welcome, Adria.
Bye-bye.
Bye.